Hey guys, I wanted to start a series known as the Dialogues Park, and this subject focuses on self-esteem of Africans. I was always intrigued by this based on how it's affected my life until this point, and I just wanted to know if this is something we're even okay talking about as a people. I wanted to start off by speaking about innate truths that are in us, things like intuition and our spiritual beliefs. So what I mean by intrinsic fears is that we have this conditioning from religions we took on that took away a lot of our personal power, I find. And because this is self-esteem, I'll only talk about it from my point of view, but I'd like to spark something in you where you can also talk about experiences you've had where you find yourself struggling with your intuition and finding that you've given up a lot of your personal power, that even if you don't believe in superstition and old spiritual structures that existed in our cultures, that the way we fear it, we still give it, that still feeds a lot of its power over us. But I find that as a people, we're usually going against our hunches, our let's say our intuition, really, when that voice inside you, when you really deep down in your heart know a certain truth, and you may not have information on it, but you know that there's something significant in how you're supposed to be making decisions. So I came back to this quote from a book I read called The ISIS Papers by Dr. Grace Welsing. And she says that the most disastrous aspect of colonization, which you are the most reluctant to release from your mind, is their colonization of the image of God. So we are always seeing ourselves beneath that image, and I find a lot of it has to do with the visuals we see through the media. And that brings me into a lot of our relationships. When we deep in our hearts don't trust ourselves, how do we relate to each other? And obviously someone with I would say only someone with low self-esteem would engage themselves in degrading other people. That comes from a place of fear where you're not so comfortable with yourself, and your sense of identity or importance comes from degrading other people. And a lot of that goes on in our relationships, in our communities, and feeding into that. I mean, a lot of these subjects overlap, and I get why maybe not a lot of videos on YouTube, on the internet, in fact even just academic studies are not really done on the subject. It's almost taboo to talk about, our feelings and what bothers us in society. We're just comfortable in our denial. But every day we turn on the media and we entertain images that are very demoralizing. We know it's not the truth about us from our intuition too, but we still feed it, and we go out there and treat each other according to how we've been programmed. And I find in the end, it's why from that, again, from my previous slide talking about the legacy of colonialism, we find because intrinsically deep in our hearts we feel beneath God, we tolerate a lot of the corruption that goes on with politics, and I find that feeds into a lot of what we're willing to accept as people. But coming back down to the individual as a person, how do you really feel about how religious institutions perceive you is that where your importance comes from is which denomination or religious institution accepts you, or does it come from a deeper place of your personal relationship with, I'll say the creator, but whatever you may consider God. I find obviously another aspect that affects our self-esteem is a lack of information. We're just not informed. A lot of information I have come across that helped me, I'd say, deal with my self-esteem. I had to really dig for it, and till this day I'm not really open to share candidly yet, until I figure some personal stuff out. But I find a lot of truth that could empower us is covered up. There are a lot of information that contradicts the socio-political structure and who we really are, and therefore that information is hidden in many places of I would say that we've given a lot of power to, and because we're misinformed, we end up again self-hating, and that's because deep down in our hearts we know we're responsible for a lot of what's happened, but we don't know, we're not informed on how to deal with it, so we start to just brush it under the table. Yet it comes back to relationships. We relate to each other through that denial, and we from my experience again, we just don't seem to want to talk about it. And I find in the end, again, going back to those intrinsic fears that we have of not trusting ourselves, of not loving ourselves really, we don't stimulate our minds, we don't express what's really in there. A lot of visuals, a lot of creativity gets stunted, and we end up not stimulating our minds. Also, I find that we receive our information from many places, and from my study of a lot of ancient beliefs that were carried on by our people, the center of existence as we know it in this planet came from us understanding ourselves. It said life was not worth living if you didn't know yourself, and a lot of that came from deep ancestral influence. When I look at the active legacy that is very ancient in us, it's, I would say, a lot of our creativity and culture has carried on from language. Language is probably the strongest legacy we carry right now of who we are, and a lot of our traditions involved honoring our ancestors, because our DNA carries information about their lives and their experiences and their forefathers and mothers going back. So you are a living library, and Africans have the most diverse and oldest information in our DNA about who we are, and a lot of that comes through in how we carry ourselves. And when a lot of these aspects are stimulated intuitively, we deny. We just don't live in a culture that not only doesn't acknowledge it, but if it does come up, because you can't suppress that comes from God, you don't suppress it, but when it does, we deny it, we denounce it, and again it feeds back into our self-hate. But again, I'm just here to spark a dialogue and find out how you feel about tapping into your potential and sharing your creativity, your essence really, and how you feel about where you live, people you interact with, your families, and whether you feel more hindered than not, and to what extent are you doing something about it. So with that in mind, I'd like you to just share what you feel and think, and post comments below, and I'd appreciate feedback and extensive conversations. Thank you.